You are listening to When Life Gives You Lemons, the podcast that speaks to high-performing individuals who have been through adversity but come back stronger. I'm your host, Emma Levy, a physiotherapist who has helped elite athletes on their way to Olympic success. This podcast was born following my own trauma when I was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of just 36. Sat in the chemo chair, I set myself the goal of starting a podcast to explore resilience and the power of mindset. Today, I'm welcoming Ricky Nuttall to the podcast. Ricky is a former firefighter, mental health advocate, motivational speaker, and poet. In 2017, Ricky was one of the first responders called to the fire at Grenfell Tower in London, which tragically claimed the lives of 72 residents and injured many more. Following the Grenfell tragedy, and as a result of the life-changing decisions that Ricky made that night, his mental health suffered, leading to PTSD and depression. Ricky now tells his story to give hope by demonstrating that if he could drag himself out of that darkness, others can too. Ricky, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to go straight in because I want to talk about that night at Grenfell in June 2017 and everything that has happened since. And I'm a Londoner and I can still remember that night like it was yesterday, even though I'm amazed that it was actually 7 years ago. But I remember, basically, you could see the building burning for days from all sides of London. Can you tell us about your experiences that night?
Well, going from the start, I guess, it was my first night shift. I was stationed at Battersea Fire Station at the time. The bells went down at about 1:45 in the morning on the 14th. And we, as normal, it's a rapid turnout service, 60 seconds from being asleep in bed. You're driving a fire engine out the front of the station.
60 seconds?
60 seconds, yeah.
That's remarkable.
And that's from without having TMI, that's from being asleep in your pants to in your clothes, down the pole, into the watchroom, tear off the call slip, see what you're going to, see where it is, look on the map to find out how to get there if you're not sure, jump on the fire engine. For those on the back, get into your fire gear, jump on the fire engine, and then pull out the station inside 60 seconds. Wow. So half the time as a driver, by the time you're sort of pulling out the fire station, you're still a little bit asleep. Quite often you'll get to a shout and you won't remember the first part of how you got there. You've pretty much done it on autopilot. What was different the morning of Grenfell was by the time we got to the watchroom to tear off the call slip, it was still printing because of the amount of resources that were going to it. Now, a lot of times a high-rise fire can be nothing, a bit of toast, but the predetermined attendance is quite high because it's London. We've got the resources. So even if it is just a smoke alarm actuating in a tower block, you're going to get 4 fire engines and an aerial appliance just on initial call. This was already 6 appliances in attendance, and we were one of another 6 being requested to go. So that tells us that this is something. It's definitely a working fire, and there's going to be a lot to do when we get there. We pulled out the fire station, and by the time we turned right onto the main road and then right again onto the next road, a radio message came across on the fire engine saying this is now make pumps 20 fire, which means there was another 8 on top of our 6 that were requested, and this is within a couple of minutes. So again, that tells you the fire is developing quickly, it's growing fast, and we're overrunning our resources at the incident.
Are you all talking at this point and saying oh my God, we're going something big?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, what you're thinking about initially is what equipment do I need? How do I keep myself safe? What is the procedures for high-rise fires? Where do we set into hydrants? There's lots of technical stuff that you're taught because a high-rise fire and a basement fire work very differently from a regular fire and differently from each other as well. So there is a whole different set of procedures, different sets of kit that you need to take. So there's a bit of discussion about that, a lot of inwards thinking about what you need to do, and you're just listening to the radio for any more information you can get whilst you're on the way there. Now, in the fire service, there's a thing called a fire survival guidance call, which basically means if you are trapped by the conditions of the fire, a member of control staff will stay on the phone with you until you are either rescued or dead, and they will give you survival guidance. So, the whole damp blankets across the bottom of the door to smoke ingress, stand near an open window, any advice of moving rooms or can you get out safely, all of that sort of stuff. There are between 8 and 13 members of control staff on shift at any one time in London. The next radio message we got was there were 156 fire survival guidance calls in progress, which tells you straight away that people are going to die. Yeah. We knew at that point on the way there that there would be a severe amount of deaths. So we made our way to the fire, we turned up, and the first thing we saw was a very irregular burn pattern on the outside of the building, which a lot of people are aware why now, but at the time we had no idea. Fire going up the outside of the building and then back down again.
And you wouldn't normally see that?
No, because normally in a high-rise fire, even if there's a window open, fire can jump from floor to floor or apartment to apartment, but laterally or vertically. So the flat next door might catch fire, the flat above or the flat below, but not 12 flats above in a diagonal.
Right.
That just doesn't happen. And that was because the panels were spreading the fire. The way they were designed basically created chimney effect between the insulating layers of the panelling and the actual structure of the building. So as panels were burning, all the hot fire gases were moving up behind the panels and setting fire to more panels. On top of that, inside the building, as we came to realise, the concrete compartments had been drilled through from one to the next to rerun gas supply pipes, electrical cables, and fireproofing wasn't used. So then fire was spreading internally from compartment to compartment, which should not be able to happen either. And on top of that, all of the smoke vents on the stairwells failed on every single floor, so the stairs were compromised instead of being a safe zone. The emergency lighting was placed over the floor numbers on every floor, so when we were carrying out firefighting operations, we didn't know what floor we were on. We had to come off of the stairwell onto a landing that was engulfed in flames to try and search for door numbers to find out what floor we were on so we could try and find the rooms we're looking for to rescue people. It was just a whole catalogue of errors from start to finish in terms of the construction of the building. Obviously, we didn't know any of this yet. We're just there outside the building looking up at this irregular burn pattern, trying to work it out and feeling fairly confused. My first task at the incident, along with my colleague Leon, was to go to the 15th floor to rescue a man that was engaged in a fire survival guidance call. So straight away, we know that if we don't rescue him, he's going to die because he can't get himself out. So we were then told we've only got standard duration breathing apparatus, which we knew meant that we probably wouldn't have enough air to get there and back.
How much air does that give you?
Depending on how hard you're working, it can be anything from about 23, 24 minutes up to 42, 44 minutes, depending on what you're doing. Obviously, we're going in on the second floor and we're making our way up to the, I think it was the 15th floor. So that's a lot of stairs to cover, carrying a length of rolled hose, which weighs 20 kilograms, a door battering ram called an enforcer, which weighs about 20 kilograms, our breathing apparatus sets each, which weigh about 18 kilograms, the weight of our fire gear, the branch, which is the nozzle for the fire hose, and a thermal imaging camera between two of us, meant we're carrying about 50 kilograms of extra weight each. So we know we're going to be working hard, and we know that our air probably isn't going to be sufficient. Obviously, as I said, we've also got a length of rolled hose to carry, which is unusual because at high-rise fire, normally you don't go above a fire floor. So you would enter a floor below the fire floor with a length of hose that is then bowled out, charged, i.e. filled with water, pressurised, so that when you go into the floor that's affected, you can cool down the fire gases, which act like petrol. They can ignite around you, behind you, sometimes explosively, and obviously to put out the fire. And what we're being told is, well, we want you to go through 13 floors of fire with no way of cooling gases down, protecting yourself from the flames, or being able to make any conditions any better.
Could you have said no at that point?
Could have. I mean, under health and safety law, we should no firefighter there that night should have done what they did.
Yeah.
Some firefighters were removing the demand valve from their BA masks, so they're going under air, and if they thought the air was breathable enough, they would remove the demand valve and breathe in the toxic gases to try and preserve their air a little bit more so that they could achieve more inside the building. I mean, it's insane levels of bravery. I was not one of those people, I hasten to add, because to be honest, it didn't even occur to me. And the conditions inside just weren't viable for that to be the case. So we started to make our way up to the 15th floor, and we got lost on the stairwell a couple of times. Sorry, on the landings a couple of times, because as I said earlier, we had to come off the stairwell to find what floor we were on. The first time we did that, unfamiliar with the building layout, we got lost.
Were you just engulfed in smoke?
You literally can't see your hand in front of your face. The first time you can sort of tell your hand's there is when it's touching your mask. You're completely blind at this point. And in heat around 300 plus degrees Celsius.
Wow.
And that's a low heat.
That's low.
That's a low heat, yeah, at this point. So we got lost. Leon, and again, Leon, on that night, Leon saved my life without a shadow of a doubt. He was absolutely incredible as a colleague. He's a very close friend still. And without him working beside me that night, I probably wouldn't be here doing this podcast, in fairness. We found our way back onto the stairwell the second time, and then we made our way up to the 15th floor. By this point, the hose had spilled out. If you imagine folding a belt in half and then rolling it up on the closed end, that's how our hoses are rolled. It spilled out from the middle like a walnut whip and got knotted and tangled, which meant by the time we got to the 15th floor, we now can't use the hose unless it's untangled. So I've said to Leon, go and find the dry riser, which is an internal drain pipe that you charge with water from the outside. We connect our hose, open the delivery, and then it should fill the hose with water, we hope. He's gone off to find the dry riser, and I've knelt down on the floor and started to untangle the hose. As I've done that, I'm now on my own, on my knees in the smoke, zero visibility, trying to untangle this hose. I realised that it was absolutely silent. Now that's in stark contrast to screaming and shouting and the expected hustle and bustle of moving through the stairwell on the way up with firefighters carrying out rescue operations throughout the building. This was now silent. There was no crackle of fire. My radio had failed, so we got no communication with control on the outside, completely alone, and my colleague had just left. And it's at that moment I realised that we were probably the two highest up in the building at that point in terms of firefighters. And in that silence, I then started to feel this sort of searing burning, and that was my wrists and the back of my neck starting to burn through my fire gear. I got the thermal imaging camera and I sort of scanned the lobby area with it, and it was 550 degrees Celsius. And there was no direct flame where we were. So that puts into context just how hot it is when you consider what you're cooking a chicken at 220.
Wow.
So twice as hot as an oven. And our fire gear will protect us from the heat to a point, but it's not impenetrable and it can catch fire. And at that kind of heat, you only have to go another 100 degrees up or so. 600 degrees Celsius still loses 2/3 of its structural strength. And we're at 550.
And it's getting hotter.
And it's getting hotter. I've managed to untangle the hose, got the branch connected. Leon's found the dry riser, got that connected. He's turned it on, we've got water. I cooled the gases down in the lobby area, reduced the temperature down to about 350 degrees Celsius, which was enough to stop our skin from burning inside a fire gear. We've then got very limited time in the lobby area to make a decision as to what we're going to do. Just before Leon came back to meet me, I heard this high-pitched whistle go off. And that was my bodyguard with my low-pressure warning whistle telling me that I'm running out of air. Now, when that goes off, procedure in London means that you should already be out the building. When you're in training, if you're not out of the building in the drill scenario and your whistle goes off, you fail. Because that is a safety net for when things have gone wrong, not to be used as, this is my usable air. We're not working hard, it will give you about 12 minutes of air. We're still on the 15th floor. We haven't even opened the door to the apartment yet. We haven't begun firefighting operations. I'm now thinking, I'm dead. There's no way that we're going to get this done and I'm going to get out of this building alive. And it was a genuine moment where the realisation that this was the last day I'm going to be alive sort of really hit me. And it's such a weird feeling for your mind to then go, right, what do I need to do next? Because you've kind of accepted that this isn't going to pan out well. And then your training kicks in and you stop being dramatic and you go, right, Leon's got air. I've got an auxiliary hose. I'll connect my hose to Leon's cylinder and supplement his air. We can get out that way. And then in the distance, just before Leon arrived back, I heard his whistle go off. And then I realised, back to, well, now we are going to die. I don't see a way that this ends other than that. Leon came back and met me. We're outside the apartment we needed to gain entry to. And we had a very quick discussion. And this was the start of my battle with my own mental health. This was the first thing that happened that was proved to be a catalyst at a later point. We made the decision not to open the door and not to rescue the guy because we didn't see a way of being able to get him out alive anyway. We didn't see a way that we were going to make it out potentially at this point. And so nothing we did at that point would make any difference other than doing our best to ensure our own survival, because there is a hierarchy of rescue within emergency services. And it states quite clearly that if a firefighter becomes endangered during an operation, other firefighters in the vicinity will hear your alarm go off, will abandon what they're doing and will come to rescue you. So if we get into trouble to the point where I've had to hit my emergency rescue button on my BA set, it means other people are going to die.
Yeah.
So it's not just a decision based on whether or not you can rescue somebody else. It's based on who else am I going to affect by getting this decision wrong. And it's a brutal decision to have to make, to actively choose to let somebody die to save yourself because of the greater impact that you becoming endangered is going to have.
But if it was 500 degrees, the likelihood is he was dead already.
There was fire in his flat. The likelihood is he was dead. Yeah. The problem with how your mind works is that the not knowing is enough to tear you apart.
Of course.
And, that proved to be the case.
Also, if it's 500 degrees for you, if he was alive, just rationally thinking, he wouldn't have survived the way down, would he? Because it would have been too hot without fire gear.
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, if you take in 2 breaths of smoke gas, of fire gases, smoke, you're unconscious.
2 breaths?
2 breaths, you're unconscious. Like 2 proper, I've done it I went to one of my very first house fires in a borough of Hillingdon in West London, and the other fire engine had taken a different route to get there, and they were the ones that were putting their breathing apparatus en route. And so we got there first. There's a woman screaming outside, somebody's in there in the front room. There was a mattress on the front floor of the front room. I don't know whether it was a squatter's setup or what it was, but a woman was screaming saying, there's someone on the mattress. I stuck my head into the hallway after we'd kicked the front door in, and this thick black plume of smoke came out. And I took a breath of it, and I remember feeling dizzy instantly and putting my hand on the wall as I took another breath, and then I fell backwards. My colleague literally grabbed me and pulled me out and was like, what are you doing? And that was my inexperience. Yeah. I was also, even as a qualified firefighter, still slightly in that Hollywood frame of mind where you can be in a hallway where there's fire up the walls and for some reason no smoke, and you can, deal with the heat. It's just not like that. You're dead. And so, there is every chance this person was dead at the time. That person did die. I know that much. We managed, against all the odds really, from being in that lobby area. When I say we ran out the building, I mean like children in a tower block. When you put one hand on the wall and one hand on the banister and sort of swing your legs down as many steps as you can. That's how we got out. We were pushing past other firefighters. We weren't handing anything over to anyone that was on their way up to where we were. We just had to get out because we were going to die. And I remember as I got outside, I pulled my BA mask off, and as I touched the cylinder valve to turn my air off, it stopped. So had we stayed on the 15th floor for another 20 seconds, I would have been collapsed on a stairwell in a lower part of the building somewhere, and someone would have been dragging me out.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Wow.
So, that was the first time we went in that night. We went in another 2 times after that.
You went back in after that?
Yeah. So you come out, you drop your cylinder, You put a fresh cylinder back on. You grab some water and you rejoin a queue to go back into the building.
Whoa.
And then you wait your turn to go back in.
So physically and emotionally just exhausting.
Utterly exhausting. Yeah, utterly exhausting. And there's one thing I will say for the firefighters that were there that night is it's testament to the firefighters that there was a queue. You know, there were no people outside going, oh, I'll just be busy over here collecting something. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
People were saying, people are dying.
Yeah.
We need to be in there. Let us in. And the poor people that were working on the entry control points, they were just being verbally harassed. You know, the firefighters that are in charge of letting us into the building were just being consistently harassed because we were saying, let us in. And they're trying to control the entry, because you can't just flood a building with firefighters. You overrun resources. There's no element of control involved. People die.
Yeah.
So they were doing their jobs very, very well and to a very high standard. But for us outside in a queue waiting to get back in, we're just looking, going, people are dying, get us in there.
How many people were rescued that night from the building?
I have no idea.
A lot.
Yeah. A lot of people were rescued. Obviously, as you said at the start, sadly, 72 died. It was the biggest loss of life in a fire since World War II, in a residential fire. And as I said, it was the start of my deterioration mentally. We went off duty that day.
What time did you get off duty?
2 p.m. 4 p.m. We left the scene at 2 p.m. We went off duty at 4 p.m. from 8 p.m. the previous day.
Yeah.
We were off duty for 4 hours and we went back to work again at 8 p.m. the same day for our last night shift. So we had 4 hours off and then we were back in, and then it's a reset. Check your BA cylinders, check the equipment on the truck. It's a normal night.
Just start again.
Forget it all.
There's
reset.
no decompression at all.
No, none. Wow. And you have to just sort of switch off. And to be fair, I think a lot of us were still trying to work out where we were at with it. You know, it's the first fire I've ever been to where I cried before I left. I remember phoning my partner at the time, and she asked me if many people had died. And as she asked me the question, it dawned on me how many people were going to be dead. And I'd already seen children being carried out unconscious and not breathing. And I thought, oh my God, like so many people are going to have died in this fire. And I just burst into tears. And then we went off duty, 4 hours, back on duty, finished the next morning at 9:30 the next morning. I was then off duty for one day, and then my pager went off on my 2 middle days off. I was part of an urban search and rescue team that can be recalled to major incidents. Guess what major incident had just happened? So I was recalled on my middle 2 days off to go back to Grenfell to help the police with body recovery.
Oh, gosh.
And I went onto every floor of the building and found the most horrific scenes that you could ever think you would see. And it was like staring all of our failures of the night in the face. And it was just utterly heartbreaking to see the conditions in which people had spent their final moments hugging loved ones, and it was just horrific. And I remember coming away from that after those 2 days, and something in me had just changed. My partner said that it was like I went to work one person and came home a different. And the problem we had as a couple, my son at the time had just turned 4. His birthday's the 4th of June. It was yesterday. So, 10 days later, after his 4th birthday, there I am at Grenfell. And it was the last birthday of his I enjoyed. It was the last time I was capable of enjoying his birthday until very recently. And I just completely fell apart. I began drinking heavily. I began using drugs, taking cocaine a lot, just to try and numb all of the pain that was in me. Unfortunately, because I had never suffered with poor mental health before, my partner had never suffered with poor mental health. Neither one of us knew what it looked like, how to process it, how to deal with it. We had none of the tools. And from my perspective, it felt like everyone was turning their back on me. In my moment of need, everybody is abandoning me, telling me I'm rubbish, telling me I'm useless, telling me I'm angry, telling me I need to sort myself out. And it felt very much like an attack. From their perspective, I was being angry, horrible, nasty, abandoning my family, irresponsible. I was drinking heavily. You know, they're watching me fall apart.
Yeah. And the fire service didn't do anything about this, didn't recognise that their staff would be going through these emotions.
Initially, Danny Cotton was the chief fire officer at the time, and she knew immediately that there would be a huge fallout. And she put steps in place for immediate counselling sessions and to make sure that firefighters were told, there is counselling available, please use our services. Yeah. And there was a real push for it. Out of Danny's, and I'm a massive Danny Cotton fan, by the way. I think she was an incredible chief. Outside of, or away from that, unfortunately, outside of Danny's control was limited resources. Yeah. So the first thing you're told as a firefighter when you go and see the counselling and wellbeing team is you have 15 sessions. Now, my PTSD wasn't only caused by Grenfell. I had quite a violent upbringing, moved home a lot, multiple different schools, a bully of an older brother. There was lots of other stuff that had never really been unpacked. So what I actually had was complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah. So to be told at that point, you've got 15 hours, because it's 15 sessions, they're an hour long. In 15 hours, you have to completely unravel yourself and work out how it all goes back together again, means that realistically, I didn't believe from the first session that there would be enough time for me to fix. So what I did was tried to direct the fixing process where I felt it needed to go by not disclosing some things, by only talking about other things, and giving the counsellor very limited tools to work with in the hope that we got to the end quicker, in time of the 15 sessions.
So you try to control the system, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And what that ended up with is a whole can of worms being opened, my 15th session coming along, not really much being fixed, and I remember the conversation vividly. I sat there opposite my counsellor and they said, so he said, how do you feel? And he was such a good counsellor. He was brilliant. He said, so how do you feel? And I went, yeah, do you know what? I'm great. I'm so good now.
Did you mean it?
No, I was in a mess. I was in an utter mess. And this is within a year of Grenfell, and my troubles went on for another 3 or 4 years of using drugs, and there were lots of positive things that were going alongside all of the trauma. It was a real sliding doors kind of thing that was going on in terms of there were lots of positive, genuinely positive things happening, but they had pushed me into the public eye somewhat. And I wasn't in a place where I could be on This Morning or BBC Breakfast talking about I'm in such a great place mentally now. That is what I did. But the reality was that, the night before I'd been up until 4 a.m. taking cocaine. And, I was in an utter mess still. But there was enough good going on that I could con people into thinking that I was okay. And most importantly, con myself.
Can I ask... men talking about their mental health is still, unfortunately a bit stigmatised. And you mentioned how the night of the Grenfell fire, you cried for the first time after an incident. Were you able to, did you show your colleagues you were crying? Were you kind of crying together, or were you all in your separate bubbles dealing with your own emotions independently?
It's a weird environment because our default setting is protect, save, help. So it's almost like the first person that cries, everyone else can't, because now they're in save, protect, help mode. And very quickly, I remember my good friend Adam Yamin, he was there that night with me as well. And we were leaving the scene, walking back to the fire engine, and this young black kid was walking towards us, baseball cap, hood on, tracksuit bottom, sort of under the bum a bit. And there was already a fair amount of anger around the area, even at the point we were leaving, because of the loss of life, people being told to stay in the building. And we both thought the same thing. Oh no, is this guy going to have a go at us? And as he got near us, and the only reason I've even described him is because everyone anyone with any sort of unconscious bias will be thinking, oh God, is this the guy that's going to kick off? To be fair, it would have been the same if it was a muscle-bound, tattooed white guy with an angry-looking face, As he got near us, he opened his arms and he hugged us and he said, thank you. And it was that weird moment where you felt ashamed for judging him unfairly and completely broken by the the emotion of that moment, And I think me and Adam got back on the truck and we spoke about that kid, and it was almost like that made us realise how much devastation this fire had caused, and we're still at the scene. And I had a bit of a cry, and I could see Adam was teary-eyed, but he sort of held himself together so that he could support me. Adam is another person that even since leaving the fire service, we've become so incredibly close. We've spent a lot of time together with each other's families. I know that he's had a lot of struggles as well, and what was a real learning curve, I guess, in terms of the mental health journey is there are a myriad of conflicting emotions for me when I was struggling with mental health, because I felt guilty, I felt weak, I felt pathetic, and on top of all of that, I could see other colleagues around me that were also there that weren't feeling the same. And that compounded those emotions. It made me feel like I'm broken. Why is it just me? Systematically, one after the other, they've all struggled. Just at different times. It's come out in different ways.
I think I read that 30 to 40% of the first responders struggled with PTSD after the Grenfell incident. That's massive numbers. Huge numbers. And I think it's something like 3 in 4 emergency service responders in general suffer or have disclosed that they've suffered with poor mental health one way or another. I think 1 in 4 has contemplated suicide. Wow. The numbers are huge. So how bad did your depression get?
I was on holiday once, I think it was the August of 2017, so a few months after the fire, and Dean Nelson, one of my colleagues from the fire service, had come out there with me and his family, and we were sitting around in a very quiet Spanish town square, quite late at night. My son, again, who was only 4, terrible eater, nightmare, drives me mental, still does. But in this moment, not eating very well. And I felt this rage inside me just explode from nowhere. It even caught me off guard. And I grabbed him out of his seat because he was crying, because I just tried to force feed him a chip because he wouldn't eat, quite aggressively, and it scared him. And he burst into tears. And I almost threw him over the table at his mum and screamed at him, "Well, sit over there then." And I won't tell you the rest of the words I used, but they were the worst words you could use, particularly to a 4-year-old. And I was shaking with anger, and my face was contorted and screwed up. And then I remember looking around me, and everybody in this square was staring at me in silence. Everybody. All of the Spanish locals, any holiday makers, as if to say, what a monster. And I got up off the table, stormed off. Dean followed me, and we got in the car, and I just started driving out into the mountains a little bit, and I just thought, I need to get away. And he looked at me and he said, "Rick, if you don't get help, you're going to lose everything. You're going to lose your home, your partner, your son, and your job. You need to get help." 3 months after that conversation, I'd lost 3 of the 4. I'd lost my partner, my home, and my son. So it got bad, It got to the point where my son was scared to come and visit me. My relationship with him completely deteriorated. My partner, it's one of those sort of slightly comedic things where you say, she agreed we would split up. She took a very brave decision as a woman and as a mum to choose between a man she loved and a son she loved more. And she chose right. She chose protect my child. And that's the only, if her decision was anything else, people would question it.
Yeah.
So we agreed I would move out. And unfortunately, that isolation from my family compounded my problems. I then had not only the the problems to deal with, but I then had the freedom to make all of the wrong choices because there were no more expectations around me. I didn't have to be anywhere other than at work. And so I just spiraled. Things got to the point where I remember getting up to get a glass of water one day and I just collapsed on the floor. Sat down cross-legged like, when you're in primary school and in assembly or whatever, and I just started crying. And I realised as I started to cry that I wasn't going to stop. And I realised that I had no idea now at this point how long I'm going to be sat on this floor crying. And then I realised that this feeling I had was crushing, overwhelming, all-consuming sadness. And I realised that I hadn't felt happy for months. And when I say I haven't felt happy, I don't mean, there are problems, but I laughed at a joke in the pub. I mean, nothing. Yeah. No laughter, no feelings of happiness whatsoever at any point for months. Mm-hmm. And then I realised, in that moment, I felt like that was how I was going to feel for the rest of my life. And then my mind went, well, if that's how I'm going to feel for the rest of my life, what is the point in living it? Do I want to spend the next 50 years, 60 years feeling this every single day, this complete numbness to the world, unable to find joy in anything or anyone or anywhere? And that was the first time I thought about suicide. And it wasn't because I didn't think I had value or I didn't have people around me that loved me. It was just because I was in too much pain. Mm. And looking back on that moment now, I realise even more, with even more clarity, that feelings of suicide aren't always about your value or your worth or what you feel you don't have. Sometimes it's just about being unable to live with the trauma and the pain that you're experiencing. And that's enough. Mm-hmm. And it's scary to realise that that's enough because I look back now and I think about what I would have lost had I made that permanent solution to a temporary problem come true. And, thank God I didn't.
Yeah, so what did you do instead?
I had people around me, luckily, a very good family, a very close family, a mum and a dad that I can phone. And I just made some calls.
Did you, from that moment?
From the floor.
Wow.
It scared me enough for me to go, I need to speak to someone. And I phoned my dad and I phoned my mum. They're separated, but I phoned them one after the other, I think. I needed people on the phone to stop me doing something stupid. Right. And it was directly after that I went to the GP and I got prescribed antidepressants.
Okay.
I've always described myself as anti-antidepressants. And what I would say about them is I felt, before the antidepressants, I felt like I was in a dark room, no doors, no windows, no light, no way out. That's it, rest of your life. Going for counselling was like cutting a skylight into the room, some lights coming in. I can see a way out. So you've got that bit of hope that you need to heal and recover, but I couldn't reach the skylight. So whilst I can see a way out, I can't get there. Taking antidepressants was like someone lowering in a footstool. It didn't do the job itself, neither did the counselling, but combined, I could now reach the skylight. And if I continued with the counselling, it meant that I had that platform to reach the skylight, and as hard as it will be to haul yourself out of that room, I can reach it. It felt, for the first time, it felt like a tangible way out. And that wasn't suicide.
Yeah. And had you finished your 12 weeks of counselling at this point? Or your 15 weeks
I was still having, I think I had a few sessions of counselling left at this point. And I'd started the antidepressants.
And had you told the counsellor about your suicidal ideations? And
I had. I'd also sheepishly, and I remember it being very sheepishly, telling the counsellor that I'd been prescribed antidepressants. And the counsellor's face lit up and he smiled and he said, good. And I was confused, and I was like, good, I thought you'd be completely against them. And he said, I'm not a prescribing doctor. I cannot sit here and say you need to take antidepressants. But there is huge medical evidence to back up a combination of counselling and antidepressants. Antidepressants, I thought, were a mask for how you feel. They make you feel good when you're not. There is an argument to say that that's true, But if you're doing the counselling at the same time, then you are getting better. So they're helping you to feel better whilst you repair. It's kind of like putting a plaster over a cut while the skin heals underneath. Sometimes that's what you need to do.
Yeah. So at what point did your symptoms get diagnosed as PTSD?
When I went to the doctors and told them how I was feeling, subsequent to that, I then had medical evaluations through my GP, and they said, we're diagnosing you with complex PTSD, and we believe you're suffering with mild depression as well. And they called it mild. It felt like fairly big depression, but I now, again, having looked into stuff more and more and learning so much more about this stuff, actual depression is you fail to pick your kids up from school because you can't get out of bed because you feel too numb, low. I didn't have that. I was still going to work. I was still just about holding my life together, drugs aside. I was still making sure I was where I needed to be most of the time.
Yeah. And did having a diagnosis, did someone putting a label to that PTSD allow the beginning of that healing journey, do you think?
I think it gave me some validation. I think it validated all of the poor decisions I had been making. I had something to sort of, I guess, blame them on at that point. And I think that's what I needed at that point. I don't honestly know how much I believe that now. I don't know if... I think having a diagnosis is far less important than learning enough about yourself to heal yourself. I think it's far more important to look at your life and go, right, am I where I want to be in life? No. What can I do about it? Rather than what can someone else do about it? Once you learn to take that responsibility for your own direction in life, your own future, it's so empowering. And that's what I find now with doing the work that I do in the world. It's so empowering to be able to stand up in a room full of people and say, I'm succeeding where I was utterly failing before. And being able to be, to an extent, a symbol of hope for people that otherwise might not have it.
Yeah, but how did you get there? So, you've told us you started taking the antidepressants, but at this point you're finishing the counselling. So I imagine the GP referred you for more therapy?
No, I didn't go back to the GP. And to be honest with you, after 3 months I stopped taking the antidepressants. I found a herbal solution in St John's Wort. In terms of how I continued to heal, I guess ultimately I had been on BBC Breakfast and This Morning talking about, my struggles loosely sort of speaking about it, not going into too much depth, a very short interview. And then people would reach out and say, I saw this interview. Thanks for talking about that. People don't talk about it enough. And I started to realise that in someone like me talking about this stuff, there was an inherent power and people seemed to be looking for it. They seemed to be needing it. And so I started to speak more about it whenever I got an opportunity to. And the more I did, rather than being rejected by society, which is what I'd always felt would happen, being rubbished, you're broken, you're no good to us anymore. People found it intriguing. They found it admirable. And I kind of coined this phrase of strength through vulnerability, which basically means when you make yourself very vulnerable, you give any would-be attacker everything they need to attack you, but the only thing they can use is what you've given them, which no longer feels like an attack, feels like a failure on their part. From my perspective, I think all you've managed to do to attack me is use what I've given you. Yeah. How pathetic. How pathetic is that? And suddenly you feel unpenetrable, you feel strong suddenly. And so I embarked on this sort of direction of motivational speaking and stuff. And the very first time it was a friend that knew about my situation, and he reached out to me. He was working for the Civil Aviation Authority, and he sort of said, do you deliver talks by any chance? And I went, yeah, of course I do. I'd never delivered one in my life. But I thought, realistically, from what I've seen, all I need to do is be honest, talk about how I feel, rather than this will help you and science says this, because I don't know any of that. Yeah. What I can tell you is how I felt, what went wrong for me, what went right for me, and people can take from that what they can take from it. So I agreed to do the talk. it went really well. A guy then left that company and went to a new company, a new role, and he asked me to speak at the company because he'd heard the talk before, and so on and so forth. We snowball. And
yeah. Have you watched Brené Brown's TED Talk on finding strength through vulnerability?
No, I haven't.
I highly recommend that.
Who is that?
So she's a prominent American psychologist.
Right.
And she talks about finding strength through vulnerability.
Okay.
So often on this podcast, I actually do talk to my guests about the power of that.
Right.
Even myself going through trauma, I was always a very closed off emotionally person. But now I see this as, my way of finding my strength through my vulnerability by occasionally dipping into my emotions.
Yeah. Occasionally.
Yeah, exactly. But it's quite interesting that, you do talk about that. But you also, am I right in saying you write poetry?
Yeah. So I wrote a poem I've always written poetry. Mm-hmm. And I wrote one after the Grenfell Tower fire, and it's not it wasn't a very sort of elegant setting, really. I was sitting in my pants drinking beer and was very drunk, crying my eyes out, and just felt like I needed to write something. And quite often in these situations, words will come to me rather than me sitting there and actively trying to think of something to write. And once that process starts, my brain just goes off. And so I wrote this poem called The Firefighter, probably inside about 5 minutes. Posted it on Facebook just to let, do you know what? I don't really even honestly know why. I think it was to let people know how I was feeling. But it got shared like 1,000 times inside a few minutes. And then a few people, I got messages from a few wives of firefighters that had attended that I didn't know saying, thank you for this. My husband's just read it and he's crying, like he needed a release, and things like that. And so then I went into work and I spoke to someone about it, and in fact it was my governor, and he said, put it on Twitter. So I was like, all right. So I signed up for a Twitter account, and then because I didn't have one, and then I put it on Twitter, and he said, tag the chief, Danny Cottonin. So I tagged the chief into the poem. She then shared it, and it then sort of went semi-viral on Twitter. And then I was contacted by a guy called Roy Khalil, who wanted to make it into a short film. Mm-hmm. And it was the weirdest thing, because initially I was being contacted by a complete stranger saying, I want to make you a movie star. And I was like, sure you do. This guy's definitely a pervert. But he wasn't. He's a lovely, lovely, kind-hearted man. And we made it into a short film, and it was then nominated for an award at the Manchester International Film Festival. So I got to go up to Manchester. It was shown on a big screen in the main Odeon in the city centre. Like, it was an incredible experience. And off the back of that then sort of snowballed into me writing more and more. And I wrote one about depression called The Darkness, which is very morbid reading, but people that have suffered with depression read it and say, you've put into words what I could never put into words. That is exactly how depression feels for me. So people really associate with what I've written.
Yeah. I've watched The Firefighter so heard the poem. I thought it was really beautiful.
Thank you.
And people can listen to it, can't they, on your website?
Yeah, there's a few on there. Justrick.co.uk is the website for anyone that wants to watch. The Firefighter's there, one about, it's called The Darkness, about depression. And a few other bits and pieces on there as well. So yeah, feel free to check it out. I've
had other guests talk to me about the power of journaling with their healing. And I do wonder if your poetry has been part of your kind of journaling process. Do you think it's helped you with your healing?
I think it definitely has. And I think if you actually look at the poems that I've written, if you were to read them through what I would call the process from start to being broken to being where I am now, there is a definite narrative that you can follow through the healing process. So, yeah, I think that's probably a really nice way of looking at it.
Yeah. And if you were to speak to anyone now going through similar things that you went through with your PTSD, would you recommend any specific strategies which helped you come to where you are today?
To be honest with you, not that's probably going to be particularly helpful, because I think it's such a personal thing. The trauma is personal. The journey is personal. What you need to do changes, I think, massively dependent on the kind of person you are. The one thing I would say that has helped me massively, and I think probably would help most people, is just having that brutal honesty with yourself. When you're struggling, when you're not doing well, tell somebody about it. I know everyone always says, talk. Lots of people aren't comfortable with talking. You don't necessarily have to talk to somebody else about it, but I think you have to be honest enough with yourself to go, right, I am struggling. Don't pretend you're not if you are. And, I can look back on my life now and I can say there are very specific times when I got things monumentally wrong. You can revisit those things and you can say to someone, I messed this up. I'm now the first ambassador for a charity called Unlocking Potential, who were the company that came into my son's school and helped counsel him when everything he was talking about was daddy's PTSD. That's heartbreaking for me to know. I then was offered a parenting course by this company. And to accept a parenting course as a man that's, should be older and wiser than he was, it felt like a bit of a failure. I need someone, I'm so rubbish that I even need someone to teach me how to be a parent now. Best thing I could ever have done. The charity are incredible. They're amazing. They helped me fix an utterly fractious, broken relationship with my son and take him from being afraid to come and see me to running towards me and jumping up at me with open arms, telling me he loves me and mocking me for being bald.
I'm so pleased to hear that.
Yeah, we're in a really, really good spot. And it's only because I was honest enough with myself to know that I needed that level of help that the help could come. No one can force you to do it. You have to choose to do it. And sometimes that isn't, I think if you wait for things to happen naturally, sometimes they just won't. It's like motivation. Wait till the day you feel motivated. Well, it's not going to happen. Yeah. You have to just go and do it, don't you?
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is so important. If you're feeling sad, to speak out, but also as the other person, it's about really, they say, don't they, that you should ask someone how they are twice. So it's hey, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. But actually, how are you?
Yeah. I used to give people an out. So people would say, hey, how you doing? And I would ask them directly because no one asks twice. Generally, people don't know to do that. So I would force them into that situation and I would say, are you saying hello or are you asking how I am? Because one is a longer conversation. And sometimes, I know it's awkward, but sometimes people would be like, oh, I was just saying hi with a panicked look. And I'm like, cool, this isn't for you today. And I'd be like, I'm great, thanks. How are you? And they go, yeah, I'm good. Cool. And then we sort of have a chuckle. Whereas sometimes people would go, no, like really, how are you? And I go, well, let's go and grab a coffee. And it gives people that, it nudges them to remember actually what are you asking? But it also gives them an opportunity to show support if that's what they want to do.
Yeah. It's a real gripe of mine when people are like, all right.
Yeah.
Because just say hello.
Yeah.
Final question, Ricky, that I ask everyone. If you could go back in time to when things were at their toughest, what do you wish you could tell yourself?
I'm going to answer this by quoting an experiment that took place because the answer lies within hope. When I was at my worst, I felt hopeless. And if there was a way of finding that hope, knowing that it would be okay, you can cling to that and you can get through anything with hope. And this most beautiful experiment existed. It was by a doctor called Dr. Richter. He was a Harvard graduate and the experiment was conducted in the 1950s. And I think that now this has sort of risen to prominence a bit, so some listeners may have heard it already. But what he basically did was take a rat, put it in a bucket of water and time to see how long it would swim for until it gave up and began to drown. And it was around 15 minutes, at which point he plucked the rat out the bucket, gave it time to recover, fed it, watered it. Sometime later, put the same rat back in the same bucket of water and timed it to see how long it would swim for. The second time round, it swam for 60 hours.
Wow.
And he was genuinely baffled and confused. And the only scientific conclusion he could come to was the rat had hope. Because a hand came in and plucked it out and rescued it before, it now believed if it just kept swimming, it would be saved again. And I think the lesson I would like to know is that back then is that sometimes you can be the rat and sometimes you can be the hand. And you have power to be both. And the fortune can mean, your fortune can mean you are one or the other at any given time in your life. But not to underestimate either time. Keep swimming when you need to keep swimming because you will get out the water. And when you see someone else drowning, you can be the hand. So take that power, take that responsibility.
Thanks for sharing that, Ricky. I think that's an amazing place to end. Thank you for talking to us today. Thank you for finding strength in your vulnerability and demonstrating that it is okay to show weakness in order to heal and to come out stronger like you have. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the platform to talk about it all as well.